Ibrahim Traoré emerged on the African political stage not merely as a leader of Burkina Faso, but as a symbol of defiance, transformation, and unpredictability. From the outset of his rise to power, his rhetoric and actions signaled a radical departure from the norms that had long governed the relationship between African states and global powers. His projects, some described as bold, others as shocking, began to ripple through the continent, stirring both admiration and concern among citizens and political analysts alike. At the heart of Traoré's initiatives lay a clear motive: the desire to reclaim Africa's dignity, resources, and political autonomy. But it was the methods and scale of these undertakings that stunned observers. The first wave of his projects began quietly but assertively. Traoré had long criticized the reliance of African states on international donors and the perceived neo-colonial structures embedded in foreign aid. What began as political rhetoric soon turned into action. Traoré initiated the Total Resource Repatriation program across Burkina Faso, and invited neighboring Sahelian states to observe and replicate it. Under this framework, all mining licenses held by foreign corporations were subject to review, and many were revoked. The state took control of major gold, manganese, and phosphate operations. But the shocking part was not merely nationalization, it was the complete exclusion of Western oversight. Chinese, Russian, and Turkish experts were invited in secret to redesign operations under state control. Within months, revenues surged, but the international backlash was fierce. Sanctions were threatened, yet Traoré stood firm. In a further act that caught both allies and adversaries off guard, Traoré began funding secretive agrarian colonies within the Sahara Belt. Dubbed the Green Expansion Zones, these projects were conducted under military protection, using underground water reserves discovered by Soviet geologists decades earlier and kept classified. Massive solar-powered desalination plants were installed in partnership with North African states under clandestine agreements. Crops such as wheat, millet, and rice were grown in the desert using advanced Israeli and Chinese drip irrigation technologies. It wasn't the innovation that shocked observers, it was the secrecy, the independence from global food markets, and the speed at which these farms began producing surplus food. He then launched Project Echo, a clandestine satellite communication initiative. While African states often relied on European or American satellite infrastructure, Traoré announced to a select group of journalists that Burkina Faso, in cooperation with an unnamed Eastern European private aerospace firm, had launched 2 communication satellites into low orbit. They were designed for secure military communication, national education broadcasting, and encrypted political messaging. Western intelligence agencies were dumbfounded when the announcement was verified, realizing they had failed to detect the launch in advance. Project Echo was symbolic, not just of technological leap, but of the ability of African nations under Traoré's vision to bypass traditional gatekeepers of information and power. Education reform, often spoken of but rarely enacted radically, became another shocking front in Traoré's revolution. He dismantled the Western-style curriculum in public institutions and replaced it with a hybrid model focused on African history, critical thinking, revolutionary theory, survival skills, and science and technology relevant to local industries. Entire textbooks were rewritten in collaboration with African scholars from Senegal, Mali, South Africa, and Egypt. International NGOs decried it as indoctrination, but Traoré dismissed the accusations, declaring that African children would no longer be raised to admire colonizers. In the same vein, he banned the use of foreign languages in primary schools, mandating instruction in native languages such as Moore, Diola, and Fula. French was relegated to secondary status, used only in diplomacy and international commerce. Perhaps one of the most shocking projects was the establishment of the Pan-African Defense Coalition, an informal military alliance coordinated through encrypted platforms and regular underground summits. While publicly framed as security cooperation against terrorism, leaked documents revealed a deeper ambition: to create a unified military deterrent against foreign interventions in African affairs. Burkinabe special forces began training in the Central African Republic, Guinea, and Niger under shared doctrines developed by retired African generals who had long been critical of UN peacekeeping operations. Traoré also invited former liberation fighters from the Congo and Angola to help develop a uniquely African counterinsurgency model that emphasized guerrilla coordination, drone warfare, and mobile fortress engineering. This military awakening led to one of the most explosive revelations. Traoré had quietly established drone factories using smuggled components and open-source blueprints. Under what he dubbed the Iron Shield program, these drones patrolled Burkina Faso's northern borders, attacked terrorist strongholds, and protected mining operations. Western powers accused him of violating international arms treaties, but Traoré responded with documents showing similar UAV systems used by European forces in Africa. His argument was simple: if Western nations could protect their interests with drones, so could Burkina Faso. In the medical sector, Traoré shocked many by nationalizing pharmaceutical distribution and banning the import of non-generic drugs from Western companies. He established a state-funded herbal medicine research center, which fused indigenous knowledge with modern pharmacology. Scientists from Ghana, Sudan, and Tanzania were brought in to investigate and codify thousands of African medicinal plants. Within a year, the center announced the development of affordable treatments for malaria and sickle cell anemia, derived entirely from local herbs. Western pharmaceutical lobbyists reacted with fury, warning of unregulated bio-experiments, but the WHO was forced to acknowledge the growing demand for these treatments among local populations. Perhaps the most ideologically charged project was Operation Phoenix Africa, a continent-wide media initiative. Traoré's administration founded a pan-African news network headquartered in Ouagadougou, broadcasting in Arabic, English, French, Hausa, Swahili, and Fulani. The content ranged from local news to revolutionary documentaries and historical programs about anti-colonial struggles. The network quickly became the most watched news channel in West Africa, surpassing international broadcasters. What shocked many was the style and substance of its content: aggressive critiques of NATO, exposés on French operations in Mali, and reports on Western exploitation of African uranium and cobalt. Despite constant cyberattacks and disinformation campaigns, the network persisted, symbolizing Traoré's belief in the power of the African narrative. In the realm of energy, Traoré pushed forward what many termed a power shock. He banned the construction of new fossil fuel plants and diverted state funds into wind, hydro, and solar megaprojects. But unlike other African nations, Burkina Faso avoided loans from the World Bank or IMF. Instead, Traoré forged energy barter deals, trading minerals for infrastructure with countries like Iran, Brazil, and Indonesia. Energy sovereignty, he argued, was the foundation of political sovereignty. His administration built dozens of off-grid solar towns that were run entirely by community-elected councils. These towns soon became testbeds for radical local governance, where traditional chiefs worked alongside blockchain-based voting systems. One of the most secretive and controversial projects emerged in whispers: a nuclear research partnership with unnamed allies. Though no evidence confirmed weapons development, documents leaked by dissident officials suggested that Burkina Faso had begun enriching uranium for medical and research purposes at an undisclosed underground facility. Traoré refused to confirm or deny the existence of such a program. When pressed by international journalists, he responded cryptically: "Every nation has the right to defend its future." The mere possibility of nuclear ambition by a West African nation sent shockwaves through global intelligence circles. On the cultural front, Traoré initiated what he called the reawakening of the African spirit. He ordered the retrieval of stolen African artifacts from European museums. While diplomatic channels were used at first, his operatives were soon accused of facilitating artifact rescues without permission. Several pieces of Burkinabé heritage that had disappeared since the colonial era were mysteriously recovered and displayed in a new national museum built entirely with traditional materials and architecture. Critics called it state-sponsored theft. Traoré called it spiritual justice. Another shocking element of Traoré's governance was his treatment of foreign NGOs and religious missionaries. He expelled over 40 NGOs within 2 years, accusing them of neo-colonial subversion and demographic manipulation. He claimed many were funding dissidents, facilitating cultural dilution, or involved in data mining. Churches and mosques linked to foreign donors were put under surveillance, and any religious institution found promoting political agendas was shut down. These measures drew condemnation, but Traoré doubled down, declaring that spirituality must remain indigenous, and that Africa's soul was not for sale. The scale of Traoré's environmental projects was also unprecedented. Under his Earth Sovereignty campaign, large tracts of degraded land were reforested using native species and permaculture techniques. Volunteers were mobilized into Green Brigades, wearing military-style uniforms and receiving training in ecosystem restoration. The program, partly inspired by revolutionary Cuban and Chinese models, aimed to plant 2 billion trees across the Sahel by 2035. What shocked many was the militarization of climate action. Environmental work was no longer seen as charity but as national defense. As these projects expanded, Traoré's control tightened. He dissolved the national parliament and replaced it with a rotating council of elders, workers, soldiers, and youth representatives. Decisions were made through long deliberative assemblies broadcast live. Many saw it as a return to traditional African governance fused with digital transparency. Yet, others worried about the erosion of liberal democratic norms. Foreign observers called it populist authoritarianism. Traoré called it African Renaissance. What makes Traoré's projects so shocking is not merely their content, but their cohesion. They form a single arc, a vision of Africa breaking away from centuries of dependency and forging a new, defiant path. His methods have invited controversy, his alliances have redrawn the map of geopolitical loyalties, and his ideas have emboldened a generation of Pan-African youth. Whether his projects will survive the storms of time remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: Ibrahim Traoré has shaken Africa, and the world, with a scale and audacity rarely seen in modern history.